Yeah, hi, I'm Matt. I've been in the village just about 10 years. I'm a mechanical engineer who used to work in the oil industry. 5 years ago, I gave up that to retrain as an architect. But part of my motivation for retraining as an architect was to do something about climate change. So I've trained as a passive house designer, and as a student at RGU, I'm also involved in starting up a climate action group at RGU to try and push the university in the right direction. Ken, would you like to introduce yourself?
Yeah, hello, I'm Ken Gordon, been here a little bit longer than Matt, 33 years apparently. I'm a mechanical engineer as well, and I got interested in climate change after we did a deep retrofit on the house and re-insulated everything, and found how we managed to change our bills, get them really down, and really from there got more interested in the whole aspect of climate change. And as Matt said, joined the Community Energy Scotland webinars. And also I've been an observer of the Scotland's Climate Assembly, which is going on at the moment, that I'll speak a wee bit about later.
Cheers, Ben. So right, just to go over a few facts, just thought I'd start with a piece of evidence. So this is a photo taken in 2019 in Greenland, and I know sometimes it's not particularly obvious to us here in Daviot, but the effects of climate change are definitely being seen. So this picture was taken in the summer in Greenland, and was the first time ever that nothing in this photo was white. So normally this would be an ice-covered lake with snow on the hills, yeah, so it's all too visible, and there's many examples of this kind of thing. And of course, most of us know that it's because of carbon dioxide. So this is some data from NASA, which covers a period of roughly 800,000 years, which is extracted from core samples at the poles and Earth samples. And so for the last 800,000 years, our CO2 levels have been roughly below 300 parts per million. And currently we're up at around 327 parts per million. Yeah, people talk about natural cycles of the Earth and so on. And of course you can see fluctuations in this graph, but realistically, the levels have not been this high in 800,000 years. And the last time they were at roughly this level was in a period called the Pliocene, when sea levels were 20 meters higher than they are today, and humans weren't really on the Earth. So that level of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere correlates to global warming through the greenhouse effect. And this is temperature data from multiple different agencies showing how the temperature fluctuations are showing a general upward curve. So from the 1880s, which was essentially the start of the Industrial Revolution, through to today. And yeah, I think we hear a lot about how temperatures are increasing, and we know that so far we have increased global temperatures by 1 degree above pre-industrial levels. Latest research published last week shows that we could potentially be at 1.2 degrees. And this graphic from the Keep Scotland Beautiful Climate Literacy Guide kind of shows you some of the effects of this warming. So for me, the most marked kind of things are species loss. So up to a 30% chance of species extinction at 2 degrees of warming. And you know, when you think about, and that isn't just the volume of animals, that's the number of species. So it's whole species going extinct. And when that starts to include insects and pollinators, then that can affect our food chain. And so you can see above 2 degrees warming, you know, we're seeing visible impacts on our food chain. So it's not just about sea level rise and you know, encroachment upon our coasts. The effects are far more wide-reaching than that. And this data here just shows in a bit more detail the difference between 1.5 degrees and 2 degrees Celsius. So you can see that, especially with plant species and vertebrates, the losses double. The risk of loss is double from 1.5 degrees to 2 degrees. And with insects, the risk of species extinction is nearly triple. And the other really significant fact here is our oceans. So a lot of our oxygen, so yes, a lot of it comes from forests, but a greater proportion of it comes from the oceans. And we're in severe risk of creating pH levels that will harm sea life to the point where they won't create oxygen for us to breathe as well. And we are seeing some of these effects here in Scotland. Again, this is from the Keep Scotland Beautiful Climate Literacy Guide, which I encourage people to have a look at. Yeah, we are seeing fluctuations in our weather patterns, and yeah, we certainly don't have winters like we used to have them do. So what's being done about it? So in 1988, when it was recognised that CO2 emissions were contributing to global warming, the United Nations established the IPCC, which is the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change. So this is a panel of independent scientists from over 120 countries who produce reports and data every year. And it's worth saying that, you know, science is conservative. So all the literature that they produce is peer reviewed. So if one scientist produces a paper that another scientist doesn't agree with a particular fact, it's highly likely that that fact will be dropped if it can't be validated. So the facts that come through in these validated reports are, you know, only the things that the scientific community are certain on. So every year, the IPCC produce reports, and global conferences are held called COP, which stands for Conference of Parties. So this year we will have COP26 being hosted in Glasgow, and in 2015 COP21 took place in Paris, and that was a really landmark meeting where all 196 members of the United Nations agreed to sign the Paris Agreement, which is a legally binding international treaty which requires all member states to limit global warming to 2 degrees and to actually pursue 1.5 degrees of climate warming. So that was in 2015, and since then in 2018, the IPCC then published Special Report 15, SR 15, which also made the news, and it highlighted that really nothing had happened with regards to the Paris Agreement commitments. No nations had really set policy that complied with their legally binding commitments. And it said we essentially had 12 years to halve our global emissions. So that we've used 2 of those years, 3 of those years up now. So per that report, we have until 2030 to halve our emissions. but the situation is different in every country. And the way that the Paris Agreement was written, it came up with a total amount of carbon dioxide that we could emit before we reach 1.5 degrees of warming, excuse me. And that was called a carbon budget. And then methods were written essentially to allow that budget to be divvied up between nations, such that each nation could say, right, well, we're allowed to create this much carbon emissions. So yeah, hopefully that makes sense. So at a UK level, we have the Committee on Climate Change. So this was established by the UK government, and it's an international panel of UK scientists who essentially advise government, and their overall, the government policy is to achieve net zero by 2050. But there's not everything that goes on with the Committee on Climate Change is great. For example, their numbers don't include emissions on aviation and shipping. You know, and when you consider that if we're going to get to net zero, there are certain places where we cannot eliminate carbon emissions, such as agriculture. So that means that every other sphere of our world must get to zero, because there are certain places where we can't eliminate it. So at Scottish government level, most people probably know that the Scottish government is committed to net zero by 2045, which is, you know, better, but it's worth saying that there's actually no governments globally that have set government policy that complies with their Paris climate commitments, which is why you may hear Greta Thunberg making such a noise all the time, because of that fact. So I don't really want you to just take my word for it. I'm going to show a short video here. So 6 minutes of this video is by Professor Kevin Anderson, who is a climate scientist from Manchester University. He's a really straight-talking northerner, and in this video he lays out some really clear facts in the Scottish context. So this video was presented to the Scottish Climate Assembly, which Ken's going to talk a bit more about. But I'd like you to just have a listen to this and see what he's got to say.
Hello, my name's Kevin Anderson. I'm Professor of Energy and Climate Change, and I previously worked for a decade as an engineer in the oil and gas industry, mostly out of Aberdeen on the Bray A and Bray B oil platforms. What I want to do over the next few minutes is outline what the maths and the science tell us about Scotland's fair and effective contribution to the Paris Agreement, and how this shapes our choice of policies. Now, I start by taking the Paris 1.5 and 2 degrees C temperature rise as framing our climate emergency. My focus then is on cutting emissions from our use of energy, from cars to planes, homes to industry. I stick to the maths and the science and the temperature and equity commitments embedded in the Paris Agreement, and I don't pander to short-term politics and economics. All the analysis underpinning this presentation is based on a peer-reviewed paper which is linked to in the notes. So although we start from the same science, I'll be outlining far more rapid cuts in emissions and a much more challenging policy agenda than you'll have heard about so far. So what does the science tell us about the Paris temperature commitments? Well, it's the total amount of carbon dioxide that we emit that really matters, not emission reductions far off in 2045 or 2050. It's the area under the curve we need to focus on, what we call the carbon budget. And this brings the time frame for rapidly cutting emissions to between now and 2030, just over the next decade. If instead we focus on 2045, and in the interim we expand our airports and we build more roads and we drive further, then we pass an impossible burden onto our children. And based on the latest science report from the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, we know that we have a set global carbon pie, a set global budget, and that's the total amount of carbon dioxide that we can emit from now out to forever. And it's round about a little over 600 billion tonnes of carbon dioxide. Now that means very little to most of us, but that's about 18 years of current emissions at a global level before we've actually used up all of that budget. But before discussing what this means for Scotland, we have to recognise where we are today. Now, across the 20th century, carbon dioxide emissions continued to rise. And in the 1980s, the politicians at the time asked the scientists to produce a report on climate change. This is the first major report, and it was published in 1990. But despite clear scientific evidence over the intervening 3 decades about the impacts of climate change, our emissions have just continued to rise, and today are 60%, over 60% higher than they were in 1990. But what we often hear is, isn't the UK showing leadership? Now, we get claims like, well, the emissions in the UK are down by 45% since 1990. That's something we often hear. But if you include aviation and shipping emissions, and indeed the emissions from our imports and exports, then that fall is not 45%, but actually it's only 10% over 30 years. That's less than 0.5% every single year. But what about Scotland? Well, look at Scotland's consumption emissions. That's its total carbon footprint over the last 20 years. And you'll see there's been no meaningful reduction over that full 20-year period. So in 30 years, since the first IPCC report, despite a lot of hot air about UK and Scottish leadership, the reality of the numbers tells a very different story. There is no meaningful decoupling. Scotland's carbon footprint per person, okay, it's less than the people in the US, but it's over twice the global average. It's 70% higher than the average Chinese person, 6 times higher than the average Indian person, and 20 times higher than a Nigerian citizen. But if we've achieved so little, how is it that we have such enthusiasm about the future? Well, we've found a way to avoid making our fair cut in emissions today, and that is by assuming that in the second half of the century, after 2050, our children and our children's children will find a way to suck huge quantities of carbon dioxide directly out of the atmosphere and store it apparently safely underground somewhere. But these negative emission technologies are still mostly in the imagination of professors and a few very small pilot schemes around the world. Yet today already our policies assume that these will work at huge planetary scale. Let's put these negative emissions to one side though and start to refocus again back on Scotland. How big is Scotland's fair carbon budget? Well, going back to the earlier global carbon pie, we can divide that between the developing, the poorer countries, and the developed countries, the richer countries. We can then ask how much of the richer countries' slice should Scotland actually get? We estimate Scotland's fair Paris carbon budget to be between 250 and 350 million tonnes of carbon dioxide, again from 2020 out to the end of the century and beyond. That's about 6 to 9 years of Scotland's current emissions before it exceeds its Paris commitments. If we now translate that budget into what that means in terms of annual emission reductions, then Scotland needs to deliver 10% per year reductions in emissions immediately. That's a total reduction by 2030 of 75% compared with its current emissions, and zero carbon energy by 2035 to 2040 at the very latest. That's real zero, not net zero. That's all energy from planes, homes and industry. To bring all of these numbers together now and think about that in terms of in relation to the Scottish Government's pathway, that pathway itself implies a carbon budget that is 2 to 3 times larger than Scotland's fair carbon budget. Now, if the rest of the world followed Scotland's example, global emissions would be much nearer 2.5 to 3 degrees centigrade of warming, not the 1.5 to 2 that was called for in the Paris Agreement. So how from the science do we get such hugely differing results?
Yeah, so I won't go through the whole 9 minutes of that video, but hopefully that just explains a bit more about the Scottish context. And this graph from the Carbon Brief website just shows this a bit more clearly, that if we'd begun cutting emissions in 2000 or even before, then we would have had a fairly easy job of it, reducing by 3 or 4% per year. Because consumption has gone up and up and up, we've made our job that much harder. And as Kevin says, we need to, in Scotland, we need to reduce by 10% per year to do it in a fair way. So I just thought I'd go over, I posted these questions in the Facebook group as polls, just to get an understanding of our audience and to see what people were up for. So I thought I'd just share the results with you just now. So in terms of what is your current knowledge of the effects of climate change, the top answer here was number 2, what I've seen on TV, which you know is fair enough. I think we knew that we would want to do something about climate literacy, or carbon literacy as it's called. So I think that should still remain part of what we do going forward. Why did you join Zero Carbon Daviot? So the top answer here was to help with community projects, followed up by learning more about climate change, and then to take action today to reduce my carbon footprint. So that's great. How quickly do we need to get to zero carbon? So the top answer here was net zero by 2030. Someone put faster than that, and a few people put net zero by 2045. So yeah, a good range of answers there. I can understand the 2045 because that's current Scottish government policy. Net zero by 2030, yeah, okay, but some scientists like Kevin Anderson would argue that really we need real zero by 2030. And what do you think is the biggest part of your household carbon footprint? So yeah, I was really impressed with the answers here, actually. So I've read some research from the Passive House Institute in Germany, who surveyed 1,000 Europeans on this question. And there was a common misconception where people thought that their cars and maybe their shopping was their biggest carbon footprint. But almost always, even across mainland Europe, where their climates are warmer, home heating is the biggest part of people's carbon footprint. So that was the answer most people in the village gave, followed by food consumption. So yeah, that's 25 minutes. I thought now would be just a good time to have a 5-minute break, and we can maybe take some questions if anyone's got any on the content we've just delivered there. But happy to just have a 5-minute break if people want to do that. Okay, most people are back, so we'll carry on, if that's all right with everyone. So Ken's going to take over at this point.
Thank you.
Over to you, Ken.
Right. Okay. So well, thanks, Matt, for that introduction. It's really good. Sort of covers the background to climate change, and really just lets me crack on with what we might be able to do about it as a community and how it would affect us. And this is as Matt's saying here, that there's lots of solutions available. Behaviour change is key, but at the same time we've got to be sensitive to jobs and agriculture. And I think the government calls it a fair change towards climate change. So have a look at the next slide, Matt. So just to try and put it in perspective, there's kind of 3 areas that we can look at. We've got diet and lifestyle, which would include things like recycling. We've got homes and communities, which, as Matt has pointed out, our homes are losing or leaking a lot of energy. And there's work and travel. So next one, please, Matt. Now, this is a little recap of what Matt was speaking about earlier. The UK government has just released in December, Powering Our Net Zero Future. And that's what the UK government's ideas are. Then the Scottish government in January produced this update to their climate change plan. And if anybody is interested, you can actually give your comments on our Net Zero Nation, which is a consultation document that's out until the 17th of March. Next one, please. So as Matt said, I've been observing this Scotland's assembly. It's a citizens' assembly that Scotland set up. They've had a couple of them. And what they do is they select members of the public, very much like a jury, at random. And then those citizens, they listen to evidence from all sides of Scotland's climate change debate. So you heard from Kevin Anderson on that wee clip that Matt put up. But they just have people from right across the whole range of climate change and opinions, but generally backed up by what they feel is science. The citizens are able to question experts and other witnesses and discuss things amongst themselves. And then at the end, they've got another 3 weekends to work on. They will then make non-binding recommendation on the country's future. And then the Scottish Parliament will agree an action plan based on the recommendations. So because they're citizens, it's just what the government's trying to do is to get genuine public opinion on what people think about climate change. And so the hope of this is that direct democracy restores trust in the political process. As an observer, I'm watching to see what happens here because it is very much directed by the government, and it will be interesting to see what comes out at the far end. So next one, please, Matt. So as Matt said, we've been attending these series of webinars from Community Energy Scotland, and this is something that that Matt found out about and then put a note out on Facebook, and I picked it up to join him. And Community Energy Scotland is a charity, an independent charity, and they have ongoing practical and technical support, and they have really very good technical specialists in there. And they collaborate with like-minded and relevant organisations and help people like us in the community to voice our opinions and to, to do something about it. And they have support from communities, regional, national and international. Next one, please. Right. So we've attended these sessions. We've got one left on the 20th of January. And I know this is a busy slide, but if you see down at the bottom there, it's got individual support. And what their aims were to find out our needs, have a consultation event, research and developing ideas, and funding options. Now, we kind of felt, as Matt and Ken, that to sort of think of things that we might like to do or suggest to the community, like maybe solar panels on the village hall that will generate revenue for the community. Rather than just do that, we thought we'd have this session, set up this Facebook group, and we're in the process of doing a web page as well, so that that people can go and find out the information there that they need more easily than trolling back through Facebook. So our aim here is to find out what everybody's needs are in the community, and we'll be very much consulting with everybody. And for the funding options, the Community Energy Community Energy Scotland, who are running the Community Energy Futures, they will provide us with a grant of £2,000 to get this up and running. So we'll only need a small amount of that to get the information out to everybody, and we'll keep probably the most of it to try and kickstart some of the projects we might think about. So next slide, please, Matt. An example of this is in Huntly, where they have worked as a community, as you can see there, roadmap from 2009 right the way through. And we've just got a few examples here, if you can pop on to the next one. So they've created this green travel hub. So they've organised and got their own car club. They have bought e-bikes, and they started off with 4, and it was so popular they got more, and I think they're up to about 20 or 30 now. They've got a community bus. They've organised paths for walking, cycling and wheeling around the place. and the promotion and fundraising has been for them a bit of a coup, because in a lot of these areas where you look for a grant, the funding bodies say, right, that's fine. Well, if the community can provide 50%, then we will provide the rest. Now, what Huntley have done is they bought a little croft and they put a wind generator on the top. And they've also worked with some of the local farmers to get other wind generators. So they have a constant income over the next, I think, 10 years of £3 million. And so they are doubling their money on that. And they have, they've bought back some of the empty shops in Huntley, and they're pushing forward with that. Is there any more? Is there anything on that? Yes, here we go. Sorry, I'm jumping ahead really, but there we go. So there's the community minibus, and they've worked with a company called Co-Wheels to have the community cars. They're electric vehicles, and it's been so successful. I mean, there was one lady who her car got damaged, so she started using one of these. When a car was fixed, she went, do you know what, I don't really need a car anymore, I'll just keep using that thing. Next slide, please. So there's the bikes that they've hired, and that really sort of covers most of the stuff in Huntley. So next slide is what's happened in a community down in England, Swaffham Prior. The villagers have got together there, and they have organised a district heating system. And this article, thanks to Mike Skipmore, was in the Times last weekend. Next slide, please. So what would we like to do for Daviot? Solar PV on the community assets, could be on the village hall, could be on the scout hut, could be on the community land. Wind turbines, well, probably nobody wants one in the middle of the village, but could we speak to local farmers and do a deal with them and have one up on the hill outside that's amongst the ones that are already there? Then insulating homes. That's something that I've done myself, and it's been a fantastic success, but you need to understand the devil's in the detail. Electric charging points. If we had solar panels on the village hall, maybe, you know, to make some revenue, we'd stick a electric vehicle charging point in the car park. Maybe electric car club like Huntley. Maybe we need better walking and cycling infrastructure. I mean, during lockdown, we went out on our bikes, the first lockdown that is, and met lots of people who'd taken to their bikes again, but it's very difficult to cycle from here to Inverurie or to Old Meldrum because it's just too dangerous on those roads. So is there some way in which we could get that improved? But really, I think the most important thing in all of this is to talk to our young people, the children and the young people in the community, because as Matt has said, really a lot of this is we're kicking it down the road, and our kids are going to have to look after it with technology that they haven't invented yet. And the final one Matt's got there is district heating for Daviot. Well, district heating should just explain is where, like in the last slide, you have a central heating. They have a big heat pump at one centre of the village, and then they pipe the hot water to each of the houses from there. Next slide after that one, Matt, please. So what we thought is we could create some subgroups because different people might have different passions, and you know, there's no reason that we have to. I mean, our job is just to get the information out there so people can get on with it, and we'd like to link through all the existing groups in the village, and to really just support what we've done today by just improving carbon literacy and really letting people know what we can do and what we need to do. Next slide, please. So here we go. You see, what projects do we think we'd like to undertake? Does anybody know of any initiatives already underway? What skills do we have in the village? And what do you think the next steps would be? These are the questions that we really would like to go away with. So before we can do that, though, and to get this £2,000, we we have to form a committee and agree a constitution to establish a SCIO, and a SCIO is a Scottish Charitable Incorporated Organisation. It's just a charity, but it means that Community Energy Scotland are giving £2,000 to a charity that has the aims to get this information out there, and it's not just for Man Ken. So we need some help to form a committee. There's only 2 of us at the moment, and we need at least one other person. So our call is going out for 1 or 2 or more, or as many as possible, really, to do this. So right, so that's well, we already said that if you want to make a point.
This is just, sorry, this is just a bit of Zoom etiquette that I find useful. There's a lot of us here in the room, so either use the chat or the raise hand function, or if I can see you on screen, then 1 finger to make a point, 2 fingers to make a direct point to something someone else is saying. And if you generally agree, it's good to wave your hands, and then everyone can see. But if you're camera shy, please just use the chat function. But yeah, we'd like to just yeah, have a group discussion now amongst ourselves. So yeah, would anyone like to go first? Mike Lloyd.
Yeah, the obvious question straight away is how did the Huntly community get the £3 million? I mean, that is a significant amount of money. So do we know how they did it, and is it feasible that we can do something to get a significant amount of money to get things going?
Right, so the way Huntly, I believe it's £3 million over 10 years. So they put up their own wind generator, and they did that by buying a little croft. And this was done in the days when there was a lot of subsidies to get wind farms up and running. It's not the case now. And then on top of that, there's also a local farm where the farmer shared his wind generator with the community. It was a newer scheme, whereby the farmer gets a small amount from it, and the community, i.e. Huntly, gets the lion's share. And that's really where their money comes from. If we were to put solar panels on the village hall, we're not going to get anywhere near that at all. But what we need to do is investigate, I think, possibly working with local farmers to see if we could, maybe Mackie might like a 5th one up there or something. I mean, I don't know, but that's where it came from, Mike.
Sorry. Yeah, sorry, Mark, and then Evelyn. Mark.
It was a question more than anything else on the wind turbine. Do we have any idea of the kind of costs that are involved in putting up a wind turbine? Has that been anything that's been covered in your seminars?
No, it's not been covered really in detail, but it is one of the areas that, if we were interested, we have got access to really experts. I mean, they are experts; they're not just specialists in those areas, and that if the consensus was there to see if we could do that, because it certainly has given Huntly a massive kickstart.
This strikes me that might be a good, if it's possible, a good use of the community land, because I don't think we really have used it that much other than walking trails. We haven't really capitalized on that. So it's a thought.
Evelyn.
Just wondering, Ken, if you know how Huntly got the initial funding to buy the croft. Huntly's not a very big town, but it's a lot bigger than Daviot. And also, do you know if what they're doing in Huntly is actively affecting their household heating costs? Because I think that if you can show people that they're going to save money, they'll be more willing to do something.
Yeah, I think, well, there's kind of 2 questions there. The first bit is, I can't remember how they did it, but I think what might be good is, we had a very interesting session where the Huntly guys presented those slides that we saw, and it was absolutely fantastic. And you know, one of my recommendations would be if we could get them just to do a presentation to us, this group that's here, and you know, we could ask those questions and you know, just see if there's a way forward. And on the second part of your question there, Evelyn, is the home heating one is actually possibly easier to do, because at the moment there are funds available from the Scottish Government and the UK Government to assist anybody with reducing their heating costs. And unless you're in a very brand new building like you're sitting in at the moment, most people would require to do a lot to insulate their homes, and there is funding available for it. It's just knowing how to get your hands on it, and that is something that we can certainly help with. But the benefit of everybody in the community being interested is that there's the economy of scale. So you know, if you're going for a ground source heat pump, say, then you know, if there's lots of people that want it, then the costs come down, because you're not having a drilling rig coming backwards and forwards every 5 minutes.
Natalie.
Right, hi. I was just wondering about the cycling. One of the, I cycle up to school a lot, and one of the things I noticed was a lot of interest in, I don't know how to call it, the like little trailer for the children. And I know that the cost of it tends to put a lot of people off. We managed to get it through a scheme. And I was wondering if perhaps in the future that could be something like a bike lending library, but with the actual, like a bike trailer, a bike tag along, and the kind of safety aspect of it as well, with the high vis jackets. Because I know not many people know quite where to start, and they're a bit worried that they're not going to be fit enough to pull it. So you could always maybe link with pedal power and do like an event in, say, the park, where you could get people to come along and understand how to look after bikes, how to attach like the trailers, how to do the tag along, and we could potentially lend them so that people could try them and give them advice about where to start. Because I know when I speak to people, they tend to go, I'm really petrified of doing this because I'm worried my kids are going to get hurt. So they don't want to cycle because they don't want their children to get hurt. So like you say about the potential in the future of cycling lanes, just to start them off so that they start feeling confident, first of all, that might be an area to start.
Yeah, well, it's again two great areas there, Natalie. Thank you for that. Again, if we had the Huntly folk here, they could explain what they've done. They have electric bikes, so that would help you with the getting up the hill with the kids in the back. But because they have got the funding for it, there is another organization that will help you fund a person. So they can't give you capital, but they can fund a person. So Huntly have got a person funded to look after all these bikes, because you can imagine, 30 bikes just chucked in the corner of a shed is soon going to get wrecked. So they look after the bikes, and they also advise people in the way that you wanted. On the safety of coming up the road, we've also got access to Sustrans, and their view is that you should be able to designate routes as safe for an unaccompanied 12-year-old to cycle along. And there are means of achieving that that we could investigate if required.
Nick Forbes.
Hello. So as part of Natalie's and Ken's Paths piece, prior to you guys, the Paths group in Old Meldrum were invited along to our community council meeting, and there was a path, a walking cycling path that they've been working on for years between Old Meldrum and Inverurie that it's come to a kind of a block. But part of that path was discussed a link from Daviot to join that path. So basically to the back of Inverurie, and which might be something that can be pushed and progressed outside the walking cycling path, because all they really wanted to do was use the existing road out of the village to Lethenty. And so you would go down out past the village, across the Lochters Road, and then out through to Lethenty. And they were going to decrease that and designate it as a cycle path with vehicle access, but it would be signposted all the way, totally reduced speed limit, whatever, to make that sort of route safe. So maybe we don't really have, I mean, I was just part of the discussion, but as another group working with 2 or 3 other groups, that's maybe something that could be progressed outside the sort of cycle walk route. That's a bigger scheme. So, you know, there's plenty of cyclists here, so maybe that's something we could work on.
Yeah, I think that would be great. I think it's Gary Oliver, isn't it? Who's and I've spoken to Gary, and the current issues are that I think there are 14 landowners all the way along the route between Inverurie and Old Meldrum, and as it stands, none of them want the path to go through or next to their land. And some of them have very valid reasons, and some of them you could argue it's, you know, just not in my backyard. But this is what we're going to be faced with, is that essentially, you know, the landowners are a part of our community, and there is a reason why they don't want to do this. And, you know, as a community group, we've got to find out, you know, what we can do to persuade them to change their minds.
Willie, you had your hand up.
Yes, I was just continuing on to what Nick was saying. We discussed this with the paths group, and as Ken says, the problem is the landowners not being happy to give up land or give back land they've taken from the old railway track. I checked up with someone, and there were grants available up until about a year ago to incentivize landowners to, you know, do things like making land available. So maybe it's something that, with so much emphasis being put on safe transport and cutting CO2 emissions, we should be lobbying our MPs and the Scottish Government to give schemes to farmers so that they would get some incentive to give up this land and make a safe track to from here to join up with the Old Meldrum Inverurie path.
Totally agree, Willie. Yeah, thanks. Yeah. Certainly cycling, there's a lot of interest here on that. Wind turbines, I'm hearing a few people interested in that kind of initiative. Could I maybe just to kind of cover the range of projects, perhaps a show of hands on something like an electric car club? I know that lifestyles have changed for a lot of people, and, you know, people working from home, we've downed the number of cars we've got, but as a show of hands, who might use a car club in the village? 1, 2, 3, potentially 4, maybe perhaps 5. Yeah, okay, 6. Great, thanks. So that could be something worth investigating. And just to talk about a few points that are coming up in the chat. So thank you to everyone who's posted in the chat. So yeah, more discussion of cycleways, car clubs, community buses. Kay raises an important point here about a community consultation exercise. Yeah, I totally agree. I think this is the start of that process, and I totally accept that there are a lot of people who do not use Facebook and Zoom and things like that. So yeah, I think part of the £2,000 of funding that we receive we certainly want to allocate to basically community engagement. So, you know, leaflet drops, things like that. Yeah, I've made a note of that. Willie's just making a comment there about the Wellbeing and Social Alliance Wellbeing in the Economy Alliance in Scotland. Yeah, I'd not heard of that, or netzerocommunity.scot. So, Willie, I don't know if would you want to just expand on that for us a little bit? Would you mind?
Sure. I think, and thanks guys for the presentations. I think they're really good. I think for me, I'm needing to learn a lot in a community, an individual context, and in a community context. The things we can do, I think, are many. I'm certainly happy to volunteer to help out. Most recently at work, we've done some work with WHEEL and the Wellbeing and the Economy Alliance in Scotland to try and help influence businesses and understand where they might need support. And I think it was a point Ken made that, you know, there are some solutions there, but also I think behavioural changes, some of the things that are really important from an individual point of view and a community point of view and a business point of view. So if there are things there that I'm learning as we go, I've also sort of signed up for some stuff with Can Be in Scotland, where there are a lot of government initiatives, and as we've already heard, a lot of funding opportunities, but it's knowing where they are, knowing how to access them. And Willie Sinclair is obviously an expert at teasing out money from before, so there are skills around here that we can tap into, I'm sure, to you know, give us more opportunities. Certainly happy to volunteer. I suppose if I have a keen interest, it's to learn myself, and certainly in terms of literacy, that's a new phrase to me, but I'm certainly keen to get involved in that, and you know, hopefully some of the skills we all have more broadly than even just the sort of green side, we can involve ourselves.
Thanks very much, Willie. Yeah. Sorry, John, you had your hand up a little while back. Did you have a question there?
I think my comment was just that home heating seems to be the biggest carbon issue. I wonder about getting some more information on insulation and possible funding.
Sure. Yeah. I mean, that's something that Ken and I already know a lot about. Ken and I are both training to be what's called retrofit coordinators. So in the future, certainly, in England, you may have heard of the Green Homes Grant by the government, the 5K that's available, and some of that, well, I think all of that funding, basically, if it's for home insulation, it has to be carried out by a qualified retrofit coordinator. So essentially the UK government, the UK government, so in England, they are trying to stop the kind of a man coming along with a bunch of insulation and just throwing it in your loft and that sort of activity. As Ken says, insulating buildings properly is the devil is in the detail. So retrofit coordinators will be required to make sure that homes are insulated properly. So yeah, I think that's got to be high up on our list. And as Ken said, the factors of scale, doing things on a, if we can get a row of houses insulated at one time, it can massively bring down the costs. And there are companies already out there. There's a company called Energy Sprong who are making factory-made kits for insulating rows of houses at a time. And they can get a row of houses done for roughly £70,000 each, which sounds like a huge amount of money, but they also have some really interesting funding arrangements for this kind of thing, where the tenants continue, or the people who live in the house can continue paying similar energy bills and pay off a kind of community loan over time. So yeah, there's some really interesting stuff going on there. Mel.
Yeah, thanks, Matt, and thanks for the really useful presentations and for the initiative to in setting this up. Could we consider ways to estimate our carbon footprint right now as a community, or at least the key aspects of it? Because if we can have some sort of benchmark, it could provide incentive for us if as we implement initiatives and we see them having a positive impact, it provides additional incentive to go further and do more. Are there ways, are there processes and gadgets and things that we could use?
So yeah, very good point. Yeah, we all love a KPI, right? So
Absolutely.
so yeah, this is a bit tricky to do in our area. It's easier to do in certain areas where people are on mains gas and mains electricity. But the major hurdle for that with us is the fact that a lot of us heat our homes with kerosene. So how, you know, people have tried to do this. There's an initiative at Cambridge University where they created the carbon map, but it's relying on released data from suppliers and things like that. So I think our best, well, yeah, we need to hear ideas on this, but I think that requires community engagement and people saying, you know, what is our carbon footprint? But yeah, wholeheartedly agree. If anyone's got any other suggestions, then yeah.
It's maybe something we could set up a small subgroup on.
Yeah. Willie.
Thank you.
Thanks.
I was just going to say, is there anything we could do to lobby MPs and government to make the tariffs equal between the central belt and the north? The north of Dundee, we pay a much higher tariff. So, you know, with the generation of electricity now going to be increasing with wind and solar, there's going to be dispersed areas of generation. So why should we be paying more than people in Glasgow and Edinburgh?
I didn't know that, Willie. Is it that's for electricity, you say?
Yeah. I think we're paying about 2 pence a unit more.
Okay, all right. I mean, the last sessions we've had with Community Energy Scotland have really highlighted to Ken and I how ridiculously complex the electricity market is. So yeah, we could easily have another seminar session on that, and we could bring some people in from Community Energy Scotland to talk about that. Certainly one of the questions I had at last week's session was, what was the best way of us lobbying government on issues like this? And they recommended some routes. Certainly, like the common wheel, kind of that would be a route. And there's different organisations. But yeah, I don't know, Ken, have you got anything to add on that?
Well, yeah, Willie is right. And what we learnt this week is something that astonished me, is that we pay a fortune for our electricity network. The government puts more money into supplying us with electricity. That's keeping all the pylons going and the substations. There's more spent on that than there is on the road network. They are the second biggest taker of money from the government after the National Health Service. And yet they're just impenetrable. It's so complicated. And I think it's got to the stage where really nobody really knows what's going on anymore. But there are six big companies that run the network, and the future of Scotland and the United Kingdom relies on moving to electricity as a source. And there are consultations out about this, and it's being organised by the big 6 companies. So it's so important for us as communities to get together and to be heard on this, because as Willie says, if we're generating the electricity at the top of the hill there, why are we paying more than people in the south of England? It just doesn't make sense anymore. We're not at the end of the line. We're in amongst it all. So it's an area that really, really needs some scrutiny. And that there are some white papers going through the UK Parliament, very much backed by community groups down south, where they're really trying to get the government to just change this system where the big 6 have this stranglehold over the network. So we can certainly share through the webpage once we get it up and done, up and running, the this information so that it's easy for everybody to get hold of and understand.
Thanks. Willie's got his hand up again.
So I was just going to ask, you know, we're an interested bunch of people that are gathered here today, but I suppose I'm curious around how much Huntly might have done to engage the wider community, and I suppose it is keen interest to me as well about how, you know, when we've all got potentially, well, heating's an issue for all of us in the terms of our homes and houses. We've got, well, I have a 4-wheel diesel guzzling car, and we all travel long distances, but you know, there are things where we can do to offset some of these things as well. And I suppose, how did Huntly and other communities engage that wider group to kind of spark that kind of interest? And then there surely is an evolution to this as well that they've gone through, and to broaden the kind of interest and group of people.
Yeah, I think we need to definitely get a talk from Huntly, and they can explain that to us. I couldn't really comment on everything, so we'll line that up, Willie. Yeah, and that can tie in, well, part of our subcommittees can definitely also be about lobbying. Yeah, lobbying government to make change. Can I invite anyone else to raise a point, ask a question, someone we've not heard from yet, perhaps?
Could I just ask what everybody thinks about the involvement of young people through the schools? So, Mike, I'm not sure if you're still involved with the Scouts, but it struck me that might be one group that we could engage with. There's maybe the school. I have actually, well, Matt and I, we've got a meeting next week with the representative of Scotland's Children's Parliament, and they are quite excited about what we're doing here, and they will hopefully help us with resources and, you know, a way that we can safely engage with younger people. But you know, as Kevin Anderson said, as Matt said, you know, a lot of this is we're kicking it down the road for our younger people to pick up, and just get a feeling if anybody's got any thoughts on how we could do that, you know, safely and effectively.
Mike, please.
Yeah, happy to involve the Scouts. I mean, I look after the 14 to 18-year-olds, so you know, you might get something out of them. I mean, particularly things like manual labour. If we were doing something, they're quite good at that. But you know, we might get one or two that might be involved in, you know, committee work, but I do struggle with that. We aren't meeting at the moment, obviously. We were able to do face-to-face meetings between September and Christmas, but at the moment that's all ceased until the schools go back.
Natalie, please.
My kids are 7 and 10, so they're with primary school, the Daviot Primary School. So I could try and I could join the parent council and then also speak to them about that and involve them. And I'd be really interested, if it's possible, to link up with you about that, the meeting with the Scottish Children's representative. Yeah, I could go in through sort of Daviot Primary School and see who would engage, because I know the kids are very keen and a lot of the parents are as well.
Great, thanks, Natalie. That'd be great. Sorry, Nick Forbes, did you have your hand up?
Yeah, I think from a Daviot community, we've got only the primary school, so it would, because it's going to be residents, it's going to have to be some interested teen, maybe from the older group that wants to come along, because of course we can't then engage with our secondary school because that's not within our bubble. That becomes a much bigger group, and we're not involving Meldrum in our Daviot Zero campaign, so engaging with the secondary school is difficult unless they have a group, and then we become you know, lots of little groups engaging with the bigger school. So you just have to find parents that can have a chat to their older children and see if any of them spark an interest, you know. That's the only downside of it being just the village bubble for engagement, because the schools have got obviously their own little groups within at the academy. So I don't know if there's any specific environmental groups or whatever, but I think that would be our only hurdle.
Yeah, thank you, Nick. Yeah, I think engaging with other groups is a really powerful thing to do. So, sorry, Ken, you were going to say something.
Yeah, well, exactly that. Although they're not actually in our group, I think we need to engage with the slightly wider community, in that we've got people from the community in Old Meldrum. We're also part of, with you guys, the 40 Daviot Meldrum Community Council, and I'm sure they're interested in it. So it's a bit like your Venn diagram, where we just slightly overlap, but we're not completely inside the bubble.
Yeah, thanks, Ken. Al, sorry, I can't. I'm not. That's the name on your.
It's okay. I'm Michaela. I'm actually Ken's daughter. But I did just have a thought. Other groups that use the village hall, would they be good people to speak to reach a wider group, like the WI? That would reach a lot of farmers through their wives, perhaps. I don't know. Haven't gone to it. I know my mum has. And then other groups like the Pilates group get the ball rolling, talking, reaching other people that might not necessarily come forward for a climate group, but if someone they know is speaking to them that goes to a different group, and you kind of just get the word of mouth side of things rolling, might be a way to reach more people.
Yes, totally agree. Thanks very much. I mean, yeah, it's totally bizarre times we're living in right now, isn't it? Having to do everything online. But yeah, Ken's made some connections with those groups, and yeah, we'll continue to do that. I think I'll just raise again that, yeah, we're definitely looking for volunteers to join our committee and to help with initiatives like that. So I would like to just just a quick word on communication. Obviously, we're setting up a web page, but for now we just have a Facebook group, although I do have a mailing list as well for emails. I know some people prefer email over Facebook. So there is a mailing list sign up page, which I'm just going to post the link to in the chat there. So if you'd like to all click onto that and submit your details, and you can unsubscribe at any time from that list as well, then that'd be great. But yeah, thanks, Michaela.
Just a quick question here for the Duncan household. You're involved with sort of younger people, but not school children. What have you ideas of how we could integrate with that group, who often get forgotten about and marginalized? Any thoughts on that?
I'm not really sure. Just telling people about, I mean, even giving them this presentation would really help. I mean, it's a very interesting presentation. So if there were a way to get a lot of people in the hall once all this is over, give this presentation, hopefully get people interested in it, that could help a lot. Also, well, I'm at uni in Dundee right now, so I'm hoping to join some sort of group like this in Dundee, hopefully see some of the ideas that they have, because I know a lot of stuff the council pushes there is quite good. So yeah,
they're very keen on the electrification of transport networks and so on. Things like the taxi systems and so on have been really groundbreaking in Dundee. So yeah, they've done a lot of work in that area.
There's even there's smaller things like leaving some parts of public parks like untouched, so they can go wild, so that more wildlife can live there. I think it could also be really great in Daviot to have some kind of community garden thing that people could plant their food at, and everyone could have some farming. I think that could be really good to cut down on a bit of food waste as well.
Show of hands for that sort of initiative, please. Great, everyone, great, thank you. Karen, please.
With regards to that, the piece of land that Sean from the pub owns, he talked to me about that once, about because obviously he was talking about he grows vegetables at his bit, you know, and he talked about the community benefiting from that. So people like that who have land and they're not really fully utilizing it, you know, he already talked about putting stuff to the shop that he didn't need, you know, for the community. So, you know, that kind of thing, that kind of bit of land, which is not in the main part of the community land, but, you know, he was willing to, you know, talk about doing things like that. So I know, sorry, the cat. So yeah, so yes, people like that have already expressed an interest in providing, you know, land for community benefit. So, you know, I'm sure there are other people as well that maybe have land that would be able to help with that sort of thing.
Yeah, absolutely. Engaging with Sean would be great, I think. Yeah. Maybe not everyone knows him because not everyone goes to the pub, but yeah.
I have something to add to that. I know my brother studied environmental science, and so did one of my friends, and they got really interested in these, they call them food forests, which is basically just like different levels of heights of food producing crops, and it makes it a really productive forest, I guess, in a really small space. You can get a lot of food out of a really small space if it's done correctly. I don't know the most about it, but I know a couple of people who are quite interested in these ideas, so they might know a bit more.
Great. Sounds great. Yeah, we'll yeah, definitely link up with you after this to get more info, and yeah. Yes, and yeah, Lorraine's mentioning hydroponics there as well, yes, which is something I've been experimenting with in my basement. So yeah, there's lots of ways of growing food. Okay, I appreciate it. It's coming up to 12:30, so it's sort of an hour and a half. I mean, we could talk all day, but I don't want to consume everyone's Saturdays. So any last sort of points that people want to sort of discuss? Michaela, again, please.
Actually, I just was wanting to take a note about what was the forest terminology they said just there? It went straight out my brain and I wanted to write it down so I can just read about it a bit myself.
I forget the exact name. It's something like a food forest or a super forest or something. I can get my dad to send a link into the Facebook. I'll ask my brother about it because, yeah, I think he knows a bit more about it than me.
If yeah, if anyone, I guess people are going to get ideas out of this and start thinking about it and so on. So I will share the presentation and all the references as well to all my slides so that you can go to the links and have a look yourself at the data and the information and the other projects. One of the things I'd like to appeal for is that if people are interested in maybe getting on the community on our little council or just in general wants to increase their climate literacy and they have the time, there's an organisation called Keep Scotland Beautiful, and I'm going to post a link in the chat here just now to a sorry, that's just gone to one person. I'll just share it to everyone. So they run a carbon literacy course, which is a 2-day course. I think there is a fee, and what I would like to do at some point is hope that we keep some of our budget for getting members of our committee onto this course. But that's a 2-day carbon literacy course that people can, you know, I think it'd be great to have some people in the community who've got that qualification, if you see what I mean. So please take a look. Great. Yeah, I've got loads of notes from our discussions here. So
me too. Yes, thank you very much.
Yeah, really chuffed that so many people are interested in this and have come along to engage. So sorry if I haven't responded to every comment, but please just don't hesitate to email me or Ken.
Yeah.
I will save the comments to go through them. Yeah, any last final points, Keith?
I was just going to say, I didn't see the link to the subscription for the email. It didn't come through on the group chat as far as I can see.
Sorry, let me just resend that just now.
Yeah, no worries.
So while Matt's doing that, just like to thank everybody that's come. I mean, we've got 30 people here, which is not bad really for a small community on first attempt. So thank you all for attending. Also thanks to Lucy Skidmore, who helped us put together the slide presentation and tidy it up. We'll look forward to seeing you all and even more in the future. So over to Matt.
Yeah, I think we can just draw it to a close and let everyone go and get out in the sunshine. Yeah, so yes, and sorry, yeah, Lorraine, just one other thing, I'll post that to everyone here. I mentioned the work in Findhorn. So yeah, Findhorn have done some amazing things in their community up there. If people want to look at that, there's a link in the chat for that there as well. But yeah, thank you very much, everyone. And yeah, you'll hear from us soon. Please email us or Facebook us if you're interested in joining the committee. Yeah, I think that's it.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone. Enjoy your weekend. Cool. See ya.
Bye. Bye.
Thanks. Bye all.